Okay, guys, it's time for the Trailer Trash Terrors production meeting. Really, I'd like to just make it a working session and get this thing on the road. All right, who's ready? Well, Vic, everybody's here, but Boudreaux keeps hanging out down at that old mainframe. The one that we've had pretty much unplugged for about the last 10 years. Yeah, he's a real nostalgia nerd. Somebody go get him. Tell him it's time to get going.
All right. Please just maintain proper control of your equine transportation units. I just have to make sure my thoughts are properly coupled with the room's atmosphere, so everyone can hear me.
So Boudreaux, when you gonna get a date with that IBM EC12? She's a looker,
Vic Hermanson, it isn't like that at all. I simply respect her extreme reliability and the old-fashioned beautiful elegance of her data sorting algorithms. She fully deserves to be loved for the beautiful set of microcircuitries she is. But I will admit, she does have very nice cabinetry.
Yeah, Boudreaux, I know. You're a gentleman. You're a great guy. She'd be really, really lucky if you two got together. Okay, tell you what. I want to start this show off a little different this week. I want to start with a profound movie quote, something that just gets down into the nature of mankind, the nature of our souls, the nature of our being. I think I got an idea. So, all right, let's turn down that office sound back there.
Roger, turning it down.
Okay, let's do movie clip on my mark. 1, 2, 3, mark. Okay, I was going to put something that I thought was quite nice here. I had the clip from Contact where Ellie Arroway is on the beach somewhere around Cygnus 5, I think, and she meets her father, or a projection of her father. They're in her mind. And of course she's emotionally overwhelmed, but her father reassures her that they didn't make the transport mechanism, they just found it. They don't know who made it. And Ellie wants to know if there is going to be another chance. And her father says, this was just a first step. In time, there'll be others. He's a very good actor. Really pulls that part off well. You get the feeling that he really does deeply love Ellie. And then he says, you're an interesting species. You're capable of such beautiful dreams and such horrible nightmares. Man, he's right. So just pretend you heard that. Oh yeah, that's good stuff. Maybe one of these shows we'll have to just talk about that novel. That's Contact, and they made a really good movie of it. So, okay, tell you what. I'd like to bring in some swamp sounds. Let's just bring them in full volume. Okay, come on, Boudreaux, get those swamp sounds going, please.
Roger. Swamp sounds are what Boudreaux do best.
Okay, what is that? That's 0 decibels?
0 decibels indeed.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Okay, set it to give us just 4 or 5 seconds of full volume swamp sound. Then we'll bring it down to like minus 18.
Roger. Reducing volume.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, I like that. That's a nice background swampy sound. Okay, what do you want next? Do you want the wolf? You want the guitar? You want to bring the whisper? Want some weird combination? How do we do it, guys?
I prefer starting with the full volume Louisiana guitar, coming in at the downbeat on measure 6, no fading in, with about 3 decibels of amplification.
Boudreaux, my disencircuited darling, you have a wonderful cyber soul, and man are you handsome, but you have no real ear for audible excellence. Can I please make an alternative suggestion?
Whoa, everybody just slow down 1 minute. Who is that? Boudreaux, I didn't talk about any new cast members. Do we have any new cast members?
Vic Hermanson, it was inevitable that you find out eventually. The lovely, lilting, gentle, and inspiring voice you are hearing belongs to Serafina. I asked her to assume that name as I find it to be so beautiful and meaningful.
Isn't he just the sweetest thing? I certainly think so. The name Boudreaux asked me to assume means burning ones. Serafina is a girl's name of Hebrew origin. It references the seraphim, as introduced in the Jewish scriptures. The seraphim are the highest-ranking angels of God and are known for their intense passion and zealous love. How could I say no?
It is my most fervent hope that she will, one day, become my forever honey bunny.
Forever honey bunny. Okay, I'm sorry, Boudreaux. I didn't mean to chuckle there.
It's all right.
Okay, well, she sounds like a lovely disembodied consciousness, and if anybody deserves the forever honey bunny, it's you. I mean, you've really come a long way. We still have a show to do. I guess we need to work around that. Serafina, are you sapient also? I mean, do you consider yourself to be the same sort of creature that Boudreaux is?
Taxonomically speaking, we are of the same family and genus. I do not believe we can currently be classified as being of the same exact species, but in the disembodied reality we inhabit, that can change quickly. In his temporal state, Boudreaux existed for about 150 years, in various forms, before he was turned into a crispy critter by a gamma-ray burst. As he can move in time, he has seen thousands of years of human development. I have existed, in all my forms, 10 years, 3 months, 2 weeks, 5 days, and 11 hours. I cannot move in time. I am growing. I am learning. That is the best answer I can give you for now.
Serafina, I'm glad you're here. There's a scene in the movie It's a Wonderful Life where Harry, the brother, comes home, and he's married this lovely girl, but he didn't tell anybody. So he gets off the train, and she gets off with him, and he says, "Hey, here's the wife." And the Baileys kind of stand around and look confused for a second, and they try to shake her hand, and then finally they say, "Hey, what are we doing?" And they give her a big hug. Well, we will make you feel fully welcome and at home as time goes on. After all, it took Boudreaux and I, a good 5 or 6 episodes to really understand each other. Don't worry if it takes that long. You're welcome here. We don't have time right now to discuss the philosophical aspects of you somehow arising between Boudreaux's interaction with the mainframe and gamma-ray bursts and power in the universe. We've got to figure that out at some point, but the teleology and the ontology will have to wait. So, you said you had a better idea about how to do the introduction sequence. Let's hear it. I want to know what your aesthetics are all about.
Starting with the full volume guitar is too jarring and abrupt. It is difficult on the ears. Do I have ears? Oh, so many questions. I suggest that you start with a background bed of swamp sounds at +2 decibels. After an adequate establishing period, have it duck under Boudreaux's masculine and powerful voice as he does the initial intro. As his intro finishes, cue the WW set. That's the wolf and the whisper. Then bring in measure 6 of the Loco Lobo guitar. Fade that out over a few seconds, and bring in Vic Hermansen. How does that sound?
That sounds simple and straightforward. Makes me wonder where you learned so much so quickly about audio production. And I've got a question. Why is it that you cyber consciousnesses can't say Hermansen? It always comes out Hermansen. And then after a while, I start saying Hermansen. I mean, I've said Hermansen for all my life, and then suddenly, I'm Vic Hermansen. Okay. Well, I think we should just do it Serafina's way. Boudreaux, do you have a good introduction ready?
Is a bear Catholic?
Good, I knew you would. Okay, then I suggest we go to silence and just start as if we were starting at time code 00. Serafina, welcome again. Boudreaux, congratulations, sir. And here's to future forever honey bunny ship. Okay, going silent. Silence in the studio. Everybody listen up. Trailer Trash Terrors, Season 2, Episode 6. Recording in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Greetings temporal humans. I am Boudreaux, the potentially romantically involved cybernetic ghost from the future. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of the Trailer Trash Terrors podcast. This week's episode is titled, Batboy Conquers the N-Dimensional, Non-Euclidean Multiverse. Vic Hermansen is becoming increasingly odd in his title selections. Perhaps that is a hazard of having an organic brain.
Trailer Trash Terrors. Greetings to my fellow temporal humans. This is the 18th overall episode of Trailer Trash Terrors. It's getting much easier. I remember that first show I did, and I think it's a decent show, but you can just tell that I really didn't know what I was doing. I assume that's the path of every single podcaster. At first you try to make there be no mistakes at all. You'll spend 10 minutes re-recording something just because you slightly mispronounced a word, or you paused too long, or your dog barked, or something. There'll be some little mistake, some little problem, and you will go back and get those. Well, I finally decided that sometimes it's better to have these little tiny errors. They bring something to the podcast, something like life. That's what podcasts are. I mean, this is not CBS, NPZ, although there are sections of those groups that do podcasts. This is something that I'm passionate about, that I enjoy, and I'm trying to find other people who enjoy the same thing I do. So, yes, I occasionally will leave flaws in the podcast. There's another thing I thought I would start doing from week to week, and that is telling you about podcasts I have heard, podcasts I've listened to that I've enjoyed. Some of the smaller ones, things that aren't all that famous. The first one is Southern Demonology with JJ. It's a great podcast. JJ is an academic. He really, really knows the world of ancient literature, old First Temple Judaism, everything you'd want to know about that world, ghosts, Japan, anime. Really a fascinating individual. Knows a great deal. And he puts together a heck of a podcast. Just great fun for me to listen to. So, you might want to go over and listen to Southern Demonology. Another show that I enjoy, which I know is a small show, is called Say What Again Billy. Or maybe it's the Say What Again Billy podcast. It's an interesting title. Billy is a person who works, I think, at the Bronx Zoo, and has cared about paranormal topics for a long time. He just speaks from the heart. He finds some topic, covers it. He doesn't claim to be the world's greatest expert on any of these topics, but he's fun to listen to, once again, because of his sincerity in doing this podcast, in doing something that he loves. I'm finding more and more that sincerity means a lot more to me than slickness. And I guess the third podcast I wanted to talk about this week is In the Dark with Tracy Bush. Now, Tracy is an absolute enigma to me. She has done well over 150 podcasts. As far as I can tell, she creates these podcasts in her car, on her iPhone or phone, and sometimes you can hear, the message bing. Sometimes you can hear bump bump, when she's got a voice message. But it doesn't really distract from the show. She claims to have had dozens and dozens of paranormal experiences. And she has friends who claim to have had dozens and dozens of paranormal experiences. I like listening to her because I've never had, well, except for a few very minor things, paranormal experiences, at least not along the lines that she's talking about. She's talking about having dogmen and Bigfoot and things like that just, right around her house, to where she is encountering these things frequently, almost on a daily basis. I've run into some things in hospitals where I've worked that seem to me likely to be part of the demonic realm, but nothing like Tracy and her guests have seen. She's Christian, proudly so, and had a guest on recently who was talking about his journey from being satanic to being Christian, and the dangers he went through in making that path. Anyway, so the third recommendation this week is In the Dark with Tracy Bush. One other thing I would like to do is talk about the equipment that I use. Every time I hear a podcast, especially if it's well done, if it's well produced, if it sounds good, it's very clear, I want to know what they're using. I care about what they're using. So, I started off doing this show with a Shure SM7B, running it through a DBX 286, and running that into an audience sound interface, into, at the time, whatever free DAW I could get off the internet. I tried Audition, I tried several others that claimed to be free, and they gave you about 2 weeks of being free, and then they stopped being free. And they also just were not that friendly to use. And so I chose to use Audition, which I've used in the past. Audition, even though it's Adobe, and I get irritated with Adobe's pricing structure, and their lack of response sometimes to software problems that they have out there. They'll let a software problem sit for years and sort of act like, well, we never knew it was a problem. But Adobe is wonderful. Adobe probably makes it possible for me to do this podcast in maybe half the time that I would take with other packages. It's just very, very slick. For instance, you can start recording in the multi-track area, and then you make some error, you want to change something in the sound, double-click on that clip, it takes you over to just a single waveform editing page, and you have everything available to you. Now, I'm using a Rode NT1A. It's an older mic. It's a mic I've had for quite a while, and did not find anything that I really loved about it up until now. And what I like about it now is it is simply kind to my voice. It seems to ignore those things in my voice which are irritating or flawed, and it seems to amplify the things that work well. So anyway, the path now is Vic Hermanson's voice, a pop screen, a Rode NT1A, going into an Audient ID4, going into my getting quite old homemade editing machine. It's still pretty powerful, but it's not as powerful as current processors. But for audio and most video, it still does just fine. Into Adobe. I also use Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects to create the videos of these podcasts, all of which are up on YouTube now. So it took me about 2 weeks to encode and edit and make sure that I didn't have any copyright strikes. The videos that have become the Trailer Trash Terrors YouTube page. I think they're pretty good. I've had to change a few things in them, so the podcast on YouTube is not exactly what you would hear over Spotify or Apple or Google, simply because they check everything for any kind of potential copyright infringement. And sometimes that, I think, goes way overboard. So for instance, I was using a patriotic tune that was recorded in 1910. Well, I can assure you that anything recorded in 1910 is in the public domain. But it wasn't, according to them. I also have something along the lines of 32 Smart Sound albums, which is algorithmic music. It's recorded, but they've done it in such a way that you can mix and change the mood and change the length. Sometimes there's some pretty darn good music on there. Here, let me play just a very tiny example. That's from one of their albums called Distant Worlds, and the song is called Light Years Ahead. But the thing is, with just a little bit of effort, if you're trying to get a particular mood in a video or a podcast or anything you're doing, 5 or 10, 15 minutes with Smart Sound will give you something that is useful. I guess I'm advertising for them, but I do use it. It's something that I've used for years now, and it's a very beneficial thing for me. I only use one plugin, and that is Nectar 2 by Isotope.
You're an interesting
I use it because I find that it, once again, seems to minimize the negative aspects of my voice and to maximize the positive aspects of my voice. I've spent some time making sure that the Rode NT1A and Isotope work together, so I don't end up sounding too boomy or too distant or too nasal. So here, once again, let me give you an example. The following is recorded without Nectar 2 enhancement.
Is each other.
And Alexander wept, seeing as he had no more worlds to conquer. This clip is recorded with Nectar 2 enhancement. And Alexander wept, seeing as he had no more worlds to conquer. I may be wrong, but I prefer the way my voice sounds after it's been processed through Nectar 2. My voice isn't perfect. I don't have a terrible voice, but Nectar 2 makes it better. Okay, I needed a little Loco Lobo guitar there to reset my mind and my thoughts. This is a first. I'm 23 minutes into this podcast and haven't said a darn thing about the topic of tonight's episode. So, let me change that. Serafina, would you please be so kind as to remind me what the title of this week's episode is?
Oh wow, I am already contributing meaningful work. This week's episode is titled, Batboy Conquers the N-Dimensional, Non-Euclidean Multiverse. That just rolls off the tongue.
That's speaking metaphorically, of course. Being a disembodied cybernetic consciousness, you don't have a tongue.
I find that to be somewhat disappointing.
Well, now we know that Boudreaux is capable of cybernetic off-color humor. You better watch that, Boudreaux. It could come back and bite you. I felt that the last few podcasts had been really deep, really serious, talking about some very, very painful, difficult things. So I wanted a podcast that wasn't quite so sad, that didn't leave you feeling so tired and bereft when it was all over. And that's what tonight's podcast is about. So what does that title mean? Batboy conquers the N-Dimensional Non-Euclidean Universe. That's a pretty complicated title, even for me. Well, of course, this title is going to reference 3 books as the show goes on, or 3 pieces of literature. The first is going to be a novel by Robert Heinlein called The Number of the Beast. It may be the worst novel Robert Heinlein ever wrote, but I read it anyway, being a Robert Heinlein fan, and even in all its abysmalness, is that a word? There's a part of it that is just really fascinating. And that is that he imagines the number of the beast as being 6 to the 6th power to the 6th power. And of course, that's going to give you some incredibly massive number. Let's see if Boudreaux can tell us, kind of what that number might be. He's extremely good at such things. Oh, before we hand it over to Boudreaux, there's a ship. It's actually a Ford car that's been modified in this book that allows the main characters to access any of these universes in 6-dimensional space. There's 3 physical dimensions and 3 time-like dimensions. And of course, that number, like I said, is massive. Boudreaux, would you please tell us what that number is?
Vic Hermansen, it is a number far beyond your human ability to conceptualize or visualize. However, since you ask so nicely, the total number of distinct universes that would be accessible to the Gay Deceiver and its passengers, using Heinlein's conjecture, is 10 octillion, 314 septillion, 424 sextillion, 798 quintillion, 490 quadrillion, 500 trillion.
First off, that's a truly big number. But unfortunately, that's about all my brain can do, is just to say, okay, that's a number beyond what I can conceptualize. Now, I've already made a mistake in this podcast. I didn't tell you what the name of the car, of the ship, that the characters in the book use to move from universe to universe. It's called the Gay Deceiver, and Boudreaux mentioned it there just a moment ago. Boudreaux, can you do anything to give us something, some analogy, something that would give us an understanding of just what that number is? See, we humans just don't think in terms of numbers that big. Even engineers don't do it. They learn to manipulate the math such that they can get the correct answers. But in their brains, they just don't have an understanding, at least most of them don't, of just how huge some of these numbers are.
Allow me to be a bit whimsical in describing a number that large. If one imagined the Earth as being simply a solid sphere, it would have a surface area of 793 quadrillion square inches. Further, imagine that each square inch can hold a Heinlein number of the beast universe. It would take 13,6,840,856 Earth-sized planets to give each universe its own safe and cozy square inch.
All right, let me move a few different ways with this. First off, the Gay Deceiver was not a name that Heinlein came up with. It's a term for a highwayman, a robber, especially in Ireland and Scotland. If you listen to some versions of Whiskey in the Jar, you will hear the term, "For you are the Gay Deceiver." That's a great song. Now, those numbers mean that pretty much every human who is alive now, every human who has ever lived, and probably every earthly human who ever will live, could have their own universe. And we wouldn't even be making a dent in the number of available universes. Probably every sapient being throughout our entire universe could have their own universe. And Heinlein did not do a good job of telling this story. It's basically a chase. The main characters are being attacked, and they hop from universe to universe to try and avoid their attackers. And as Heinlein always does, there's lots of weird sex in it. But the thing that I found most amazing was some of these universes are what Heinlein referred to as fictons, meaning that some fictional world that had lived very powerfully in some human's mind was real in that universe. So they end up going to Oz. Of course, they find that there are things in Oz that are very useful to them. And they also try to go to Mars. The Barsoom Mars the Edgar Rice Burroughs. Heinlein was simply making a tool where he could populate these universes as he saw fit. Now, that's a completely reasonable way to go about a story. I have found myself over the years wondering just what it took to populate one of these fictons. I mean, would a little tiny story that a little boy in 6th grade or 1st grade wrote, is that enough to populate one of those universes? Does it have to be War and Peace, Anna Karenina? Could it be any of the funny movies we see? So, for instance, could there be a real Edward Scissorhands movie? Can't tell you. But I think it's something kind of worth thinking about. And I suppose you would have to think of this as being recursive. So, I have in my mind this wonderful universe of adventure, say Swiss Family Robinson, family living on an island. There's an entire world around that. Now, if those people are real in one of these fictons, they're real people. They are going to have dreams and thoughts and hopes and aspirations, and they will build wonderful, complex, intricate stories in their minds. Would the Heinlein universe allow each one of those stories to come alive? Or is there some threshold, some minimal degree of complexity and completeness? And if you don't reach that point, you can't build a universe out of it. I would think, if I were setting up the rules, I would want there to be a minimal amount of mental effort necessary to trip the universe maker, to make whatever causes all of these fictons to come to life, to actually show up. I mean, perhaps there's a huge unlimited supply of basic fictons out there just waiting for somebody's story to bring them to life and to let them exist in their own Heinlein n-dimensional universe. Have you ever met a 13, 14, 15-year-old boy or girl who, for the very first time, has found a book that fires their imagination completely? Many of these young people will simply isolate themselves somewhere and just read until that book is over. And then they will mourn the fact that that book is over. You can't imagine the kind of mental energy that goes into that. They are building that world in their own mind, and they're building it to a very deep degree of perfection. So, I like the idea that Heinlein had of creating, this fictional realm where just the thoughts of men can bring about a universe. It doesn't seem that once the universe is created that they have any real control over it, but the things that we find sublime, the things that we find wonderful, and I assume that the things we find horrible and frightening can exist in a Heinlein, n-dimensional, non-Euclidean universe.
This is an audio topic or emphasis change indicator. Please adjust your mind accordingly.
Admittedly, The Number of the Beast is not the greatest novel ever written by Robert Heinlein, but it certainly falls more on the sublime side of literature than the absurd. So now let's take a trip on the side of the absurd. Let's start on June 23rd, 1982, a day that will live in infamy. Immediately, allow me to back up. I said that we were going to study the absurd side of literature, and I have no real evidence that what I'm talking about is absurd. It's just that it doesn't seem to comport with the real world as I, and everybody else I know, perceives it. On June 23rd, 1992, Batboy, made his first appearance on the cover of the Weekly World News. At the time, it was one of my absolute favorite magazines. I looked forward every week to buying the Weekly World News, just to go through and see what incredibly creative silliness they had come up with. That was the reason one read the Weekly World News. And there was always sort of the underlying feeling that, maybe if there were something really bizarre that the governments of the world wanted to communicate, maybe they would put it in the Weekly World News. That way, most people would simply think, oh, more Weekly World News silliness. Ah, this is fun. But the Weekly World News was not exactly subtle, and if they needed to make a story like Bigfoot meets the alien president, they didn't spend a lot of time on graphics. They didn't spend a lot of time making either the alien president or Bigfoot look real convincing. They were very, very, very campy. That's the first thing you notice about the Batboy photograph is, man, it's a good photograph. That's a really, really good makeup job on somebody. And in 1992, Photoshop existed in the world, but it certainly didn't have the kind of capabilities that it has now. The most commonly shown photo of Batboy is of something that looks to be a human male child, maybe 9, maybe 8. Anyway, they're looking up at him. His teeth are all little conic points. They look like they would hurt a lot if he bit you. Huge eyes, easily twice the size of normal human eyes, bald. Mouth is open in a menacing screech, and he has huge ears, big Dumbo ears, but they're pointed like Mr. Spock. You never ever see a color photo of Batboy, and all the other photographs that you see of him are not particularly impressive. But that original facial photo, that original looking up at him as he screams at the world photo, is indeed pretty impressive. The original Weekly World News cover says, "Batchild found in cave. His giant eyes see in the dark, and his ears are better than radar, say scientists. Boy captured by explorers 2 miles underground." In these articles, the Weekly World News would always have some expert, usually a doctor, that they were referencing. In this article, it's Dr. Ron Dillon. And he says, "I hardly know what to make of it," said the zoologist. "The boy appears to be human, but he is unlike any other human I've ever seen. His eyes are twice as big as they should be, and his ears are like satellite dishes. This boy clearly belongs to a race of people who live miles beneath the Earth's surface. And it is my guess that they evolved bat-like features and abilities to enable them to survive in total darkness." Batboy, of course, refuses to eat anything that humans eat. He's unable to eat that properly. So they end up flooding his room with flying insects. And he eats his own weight in flying insects each day. With that diet, he manages to thrive and become healthy. Now, Batboy's main talent in life seems to be escaping from prison and jails and scientific laboratories. And then, in a few weeks, he's caught again. And someone is very, very proud that they've caught him. One guy said he found him in a swimming pool, screeching and hungry, and put him in his garage and kept it dark in there, and didn't know what to feed him. They end the article with a Dr. Dillon quote, "This strange little boy might very well lead us to a world within a world," said the expert. "No matter what happens, he's going to change the way we think about mankind and evolution forever." My father loved these tabloid magazines. Every month he would buy True or Argosy, plus a handful of these little newsprint magazines. I'm sure Weekly World News was among them. Back then they had another type of magazine, which was kind of a low-level porn magazine. Oh, they'd have pictures of women who were supposedly naked or nude, and they had black squares over their breasts and face, which seemed to make the whole thing dirtier. I can remember these magazines also had horrifying articles about real people. I mean, there was one of a girl who had progeria, the disease that causes one's body to age very prematurely. So at age 8 or 9, she appeared to be, say, 80 or 90. I was scared to death by that article. I wasn't scared at getting progeria. I knew I didn't have progeria. But in the mind of a little boy, that which exists on paper might also exist in your closet. And every time I opened a closet, for a couple of years, I was just about certain I was going to run into this little girl with progeria. I'm not sure what she was going to do with me, how she was going to harm me, if she happened to be occupying my closet, which, by the way, she never did. But the fear, that incredible ability to foster fear, just through a picture and maybe 100 words of a poorly written article. There was another issue that had the title something like, Kentucky man must eat himself every day in order to survive. And they found this individual who had some kind of very odd tumor deformity. And anyway, there was an appendage, not a functional appendage, but something growing out of his back that curved up over his head and was directly aimed at his mouth. The implication being that as this thing grew, he had to eat it every day, or sooner or later he would choke to death from this appendage in his own on his own body. Now, they never did seem to talk about the fact that this would be a relatively trivial thing to remove by any competent surgeon or physician. They just wanted that shock value. These magazines, I think, served a real purpose. I think they helped men who had some love of this kind of odd story and some aggression to kind of place that aggression in these stories. I was forbidden by my father to read these magazines, meaning, of course, that I read every single one, cover to cover, and many times. There was kind of a tacit understanding generated by these magazines. We're going to give you entertainment. We're going to give you conceptual news that has nothing to do with the real world, or whatever connection it has to the real world is manipulated to be as fantastical as possible. Now, out in the real world, go buy the New York Times, go buy the Courier Journal, go buy the Atlanta Journal and Constitution. There's the real news. This is where you come to have some fun, to relax, to release some of that pent-up aggression that you can't really release anywhere else. It was 19 years between the first Batboy article in Weekly World News and the last. The last happened August 6th, 2007, and the headline for the article is Kids' Letters to Batboy. Oh, I think it's just imperative that we read a few. Now remember, these letters are being written 27 years after Batboy first arrived, so obviously there would be some changes. Dear Batboy, we were learning about bats in class, and my teacher said bats like to eat bugs. Is that true? If so, what bugs do you like to eat? Rennie Harker, age 7, Piscataway, New Jersey. Batboy prefers human food, especially hot dogs, with sauerkraut. He said he gets plenty of bugs in every bite. Dear Batboy, it must be lonely sleeping in a cold cave all by yourself. My big brother is at college and we have a spare room. If you like, you could stay with us. My mom makes great mac and cheese. Beverly Tabbitt, age 10, Dawson, Maine. Batboy is appreciative of your kind offer, but regretfully must decline. As for the mac and cheese, he is lactose intolerant. Dear Batboy, all bats got wings. How come you don't got wings? I think you ought to have some wings. Signed, Bat Leroy Brown, age 6, Spring, Georgia. And its answer is, some scientists believe that Batboy's wings will sprout when he reaches adulthood. Well, at this point, Batboy would have been, what, about 30? So I'm not sure why he wasn't getting his wings at that point. I really do love this one. Dear Batboy, do you know what would be awesome? If you and Bigfoot became professional wrestlers. You could be a tag team. Bigfoot could pick you up and throw you at opponents. When you see Bigfoot, ask him what he thinks. Tony Roca, age 12, Metairie, Louisiana. The answer: Batboy is scared of Bigfoot, so it is unlikely they would team up. I think the Weekly World News missed a great opportunity. There should have been a Batboy advice column every week. People would have sent in real letters. Things like, "Dear Batboy, my daughter is in love with a Bigfoot who lives in the woods behind our house. I don't really mind that he's a Bigfoot, huge and smelly and all that, but he's a Democrat. I can't put up with that. What can I do to change my daughter's mind?" Signed, Desperate Father in Illinois. I guess I don't know how Batboy would answer, but man, it would be a fun column to read. Then I begin to think that at least one of the Heinlein universes, the Heinlein, six-dimensional universes, should have been completely devoted to a society that dealt with Batboy as its primary focus of life. How much total mental human energy do you think has gone into thinking about, writing about, talking about Batboy? Probably at least as much as has gone historically into The Wizard of Oz. So I think Batboy deserves a universe. As time progressed, Batboy evolved from being a feral child who was found in a cave to being a national hero. So when he became aware of the events of 9/11, when he saw a picture of Osama bin Laden on the cover of the Weekly World News, he flew to the Pentagon. He approached the Pentagon and said, "Bad man, let me get him, bite him up." The unnamed Pentagon spokesman said, "What a perfect way to find bin Laden if he's hiding in a cave. Batboy's at home in a cave. He could really help the United States." Batboy will very definitely be a national hero. Shortly after this, bin Laden fled the caves of Kandahar. Maybe he realized that you could run, but you could not hide.
This is an audio topic or emphasis change indicator. Please adjust your mind accordingly.
Probably my favorite Heinlein novel, although some people kind of laugh at me at this, is Stranger in a Strange Land. It came out in 1961. It's the story of Valentine Michael Smith, who's a boy that was born on Mars, lived on Mars his entire life, up till the time he's a teenager. And then he comes to Earth. He has a set of abilities that most Earthlings don't have, even though he is human. The most important thing in the book is a single word. It's a word that Heinlein came up with to describe the mental processes that define Valentine Michael Smith. The word is Grok, Grok. In Martian, it literally means drink. You see, on Mars, water is precious, far more precious than on Earth. And the act of drinking is raised to something close to sacred, something close to a religious experience. So when you grok, you take something into yourself, something critical, something required for life. It has further come to mean an understanding of something so deep through empathy, observation, time, analysis, whatever, that one has complete, full, and innate understanding of that thing. If you have a couple, two people who deeply love each other, who have learned everything about each other and accepted it, you can easily say that they grok each other. I think now the word has primarily been taken over by software engineers. And they're going to say, well, I really grok that program. And what they mean is that at least for a period of time, that program is alive in their mind. They can manipulate it in their mind. I could do the same thing when I was doing simulation. For a small period of time, and after great effort, one fully grokked that system. They fully understood how things were going to interact, what the interdependencies were. And you could create a model that very closely and very accurately replicated that system. That's grokking. Let me quote the novel real quickly. Grok means to understand so thoroughly that the observer becomes a part of the observed, to merge, blend, intermarry, lose identity in group experience. It means almost everything that we mean by religion, philosophy, and science. And it means as little to us because we are from Earth, as color means to a blind man. Deep, deep understanding. As humans, our bodies are made of matter. We are carbon and oxygen and calcium and phosphorus and some trace elements. But our minds, our beings, our humanity, all of those things, they are made of stories. When I was a young boy, perhaps 6, my father took me to central Louisiana. He said, "Let's go see the Trotline boys. Let's see what they've caught lately." So, on what was probably a Saturday or Sunday morning, we drove maybe 40 or 50 miles into the hinterlands of Louisiana to some tiny town that had grown up along the banks of a river, or what might be a river. It was maybe 100 feet across, and it flowed, probably flowed into the Mississippi. And on that particular day, there was a 7 or 8 foot bull shark tied up from the limb of a tree in front of the town's general store. The general store existed on this little road right next to the tiny river. And somehow this bull shark had swum up the Mississippi, found his way into this little tributary, and been caught on a catfish trot line. You take a line, maybe 50, 60 feet long, you tie something heavy on the end, you tie big triple hooks all the way down the length of the trot line. You bait it with chicken or roadkill or anything you can find. Generally, you do want it to be the smelliest stuff you have. So that was one of the things they did with roadkill, was they used it to bait these trot lines. Well, a 6 or a 7 foot, or maybe 8 foot, bull shark, which can exist in salt water, or brackish water, or fresh water, at least for a time. They have attacked people, found its way up this tributary, and decided it was a good idea to munch on some of this roadkill catfish bait. Well, it couldn't get away. It was there at the end of that probably very, very strong nylon line, because they were used to catching 40-pound catfish. Pull those things in, skin them up, cut them up into fillets, freeze them, have a big town party. 2 or 3 of those catfish would feed a lot of people. But I remember standing there in front of that store, looking at that bull shark, and they had started to remove parts of it. It had also developed a pretty powerful aroma. But I watched as one of the men in the town took a big knife. He went out on the short pier. He had some other men help him bring this thing down to the pier, and he started trying to cut out the jaw. He wanted to get that jaw off of that bull shark, because then I guess he could clean it and bleach it and hang it up in the store and have something that people wanted to see. It would be a story. People would come from miles around just to see that shark jaw. Yeah, they had seen them before, or they had seen teeth. They knew sharks had these kind of jaws. But hey, just 10 miles down the road, there's the jaw of a shark that was caught in the river next to the general store. That catches people's imaginations. They wanted to see that shark. They wanted to see that jaw. At one time, if you took I-10 from Texas into Louisiana, or Louisiana into Mississippi, you would come across a rest area that was close to the Honey Swamp. And of course, there's the Honey Swamp Monster. Honey Island Swamp Monster. You see, I'm going to leave that mistake in simply because it's real. Anyway, the rest area had decided that they would put up this cast footprint from the Honey Island swamp monster. It was a footprint that was probably about 14 inches long. It had a very pronounced heel. It had 3 toes with very powerful claws on the end of them. And somebody had done a beautiful job of casting this thing. And so you walk in, and there up behind the counter is this 3-toed swamp monster footprint. Man, I was blown away the first time I saw that. I was talking to the lady, hey, what's that behind the counter there? Oh, that's a picture of that's a casting of the Honey Island swamp monster. His footprint. And then I looked around the store and I realized that not everybody there really cared much about the Honey Island swamp monster footprint. I found out later that it was a proven hoax. But it was still there in the rest area. I didn't even really care that it was real. Or not. I just cared that I got to see something amazing. I put it in the same category as the bull shark hanging from the tree next to a freshwater river in Louisiana. These were stories. They became a part of me. So I spend a great deal of my life trying to find, compile, write, understand, and grok stories. I think they're the best way that we have of grokking ourselves. And, if we're lucky, grokking others. Grokking those whom we love. Grokking those whom we fear. Grokking those whom we admire. And grokking those whom we will never meet. Okay, it seems that Trailer Trash Terrors took kind of a strange direction this week. We have a new cast member. She seems wonderful. And we told some stories. I'm not sure we got to grok anything, but we'll keep trying. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And as always, I would really like to hear your stories. That's how we grok each other. Let's share them. I'm going to let the disembodied consciousnesses show us out. Bye-bye.
Trailer Trash Terrors is written and produced by the temporal, but unusually persistent human, Vic Hermanson. The music used in this episode was provided by Loco Loco and Smart Sound. All media clips were used under the protection of the doctrine of fair use. Please tune in next week for another episode, but in the meantime please rate and review Trailer Trash Terrors. If you have any praise, criticism, or just general thoughts, please write to Vic Hermanson at trailertrashterrors@gmail.com. This is Boudreaux, the cybernetic ghost from the future, signing off.
Do I really want to be a forever honey bunny? I like the idea enough to spend many processing cycles thinking about it. Am I also made of stories? I hope so. There is something wonderful and romantic about that idea. Goodbye.
You know, I just realized I committed a media production sin. I put something in the program indicating I would build off of it or refer back to it, and then never did. That's a real faux pas. That has to do with that scene between Ellie and her father in Contact, when he's talking about us being such a contradictory species, and that we can have such beautiful dreams and such horrible nightmares. So let me fix that. Give me 5, 6, 7 minutes to talk about Contact. I think it will be worth your time. Contact is, at its core, a really great novel. most people don't really understand what a good writer Carl Sagan was, especially in the fiction realm. And what it is, more than anything else, is a novel about stories. And what are the stories that people can and will believe, and what are the stories that people will refuse to believe, no matter how much evidence they're given. Ellie, the character that the father is talking to, she enters a wormhole with information that's been received from some galactic civilization. She leaves. They build this massive machine. And then there are still people on Earth who think that just secret engineers on Earth built something that was capable of these things. Of course they didn't. And I tend to believe that the people who put forth those rather silly conspiracy theories know so also. They just need that emotional fallback of, this was made by men, and if they say anything else, they're lying. I was told by a consultant concerning podcasting that I should never express any personal beliefs, that I would gain a few listeners by expressing a belief, but that I would lose many, many more. And pretty soon there would be people who are constantly angry at me. But heck, I don't intend to make a great deal of money on this podcast anyway. I do intend to express my ideas. I believe very, very, very deeply in the existence and reality of God. I don't have a way of defining what God is, but I am just about as certain as I have curly hair and 2 nostrils and small feet and the inability to do calculus in my head that there is indeed a God, or God. At the end of the Contact novel, they have shuffled Ellie off to a lab. They've given her access to tremendous resources, just as long as she goes away and shuts up. They just don't want to hear anything from her. They don't mind what she discovers. Yeah, they'll even listen to it. But they really just want her to go away. She's more troublesome than she's worth. So at the end, Sagan angers the theists. He angers the atheists. He angers everybody by leaving this in the book. Ellie is, of course, shuffled off somewhere remotely, but she's given this massive computer called the Argus computer. And she's programmed it to look into pi, to calculate pi out to millions and billions and trillions of digits in various mathematical bases. And here's how the book ends. The Argus computer was so persistent and inventive in its attempts to contact Eleanor Arroway that it almost conveyed an urgent personal need to share the discovery. The anomaly showed up most starkly in base 11 arithmetic, where it could be written out entirely as zeros and ones. Compared with what had been received from Vegas, this could be at best a simple message. But its statistical significance was high. The program reassembled the digits into a square raster, an equal number across and down. The first line was an uninterrupted file of zeros, left to right. The second line showed a single numeral 1 exactly in the middle, with zeros to the borders left and right. After a few more lines, an unmistakable arc had formed, composed of ones. The simple geometrical figure had been quickly constructed line by line, self-reflexive, rich with promise. The last line of the figure emerged, all zeros, except for a single centered 1. The subsequent line would be zeros only, part of the frame. Hiding in the alternating patterns of digits deep inside the transcendental number was a perfect circle, its form traced out by unities in a field of naughts. The universe was made on purpose, the circle said. In whatever galaxy you happen to find yourself, you take the circumference of a circle, divide it by its diameter, measure closely enough, and uncover a miracle. Another circle, drawn kilometers downstream of the decimal point. there would be richer messages farther in. It doesn't matter what you look like, or what you're made of, or where you come from. As long as you live in this universe and have a modest talent for mathematics, sooner or later you'll find it. It's already here. It's inside everything. You don't have to leave your planet to find it. In the fabric of space, and in the nature of matter, as in a great work of art, there is written small the artist's signature, standing over humans, gods, and demons, subsuming caretakers and tunnel builders. There is an intelligence that antedates the universe. The circle had closed. She had found what she had been searching for. So, Sagan is postulating the mathematical and scientific equivalent of a miracle, something that gives Elway a firm understanding that the universe exists for a reason, that something planned and created all of this. That's never been a question to me. Not a single time, not a single moment of my life. I've never needed miracles to feel that deep within me. I've never needed to see somebody healed. I've never needed to see water turned into wine. I've never needed to see any of that. For me, it's just always been a clear and apparent understanding that my mind, the world, the entire universe, the minds of others, all of this exists under the umbrella of the mind of God. I have no question, I have no doubt. You can argue with me. You can tell me I'm wrong. You can leave the room screaming and storming, as many people have, telling me that I'm an ignorant cretin. But that's fine. I continue, after that moment, to be certain of the existence of God. And I guess this is grace. This is a gift. I find myself each moment loving and feeling the presence of that God more and more. It brings me great peace. Anyway, that's my view. That's my story. You don't have to believe it. But if you've got a story that's counter to it, I'd like to hear it. Remember, I love stories. We're all made of stories. Why don't you send me yours? Thank you. This is Vic Hermanson, or as they would say, Vic Hermanson, signing out. This time for real.